Dominic has asked me to remind you that at 5:30, when this session ends, there's a reflection session with the brilliant Scottish poet Morag Anderson and Autumn, who we've heard from earlier on, is going to be reflecting on the day, and I think that's going to be a fascinating session. So don't be rushing off at 5:30. We have the last reflection, which I think is going to be bring the day round it off really amazingly. I'm delighted I'll just welcome the convener of this panel, who is Professor Iracema Leroi, who is an old age psychiatrist with a incredible expertise in Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia, but also leads international trials on including looking at the role of sensory deficits in both ameliorating and worsening neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's disease and across the world, and who founded Dementia Trials Ireland, which is a fantastic resource now in Ireland, funded by the Health Research Board, so that we can have proper clinical trials on scale in Ireland to help us really advance better treatments for dementia. And of course, Ira is a prized colleague, a leader in the Global Brain Health Institute, which is, of course, has initiated this with Creative Aging, this Creative Brain Week. And Ira herself is a pretty mean cold water, open water sea swimmer. Came back from the Western Sahara recently, I think. I didn't know they had sea in Sahara, but apparently they do off the coast.
That wasn't cold.
But anyway, I'm delighted to hand over to Ira, who will then introduce the panel. Thank you, Ira.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thank you to all of you for taking your time to spend your afternoons with us as we delve into the mind of the extreme swimmer. Now, I realize as sports people, we're kind of interlopers here in amongst the creative arts people, but I think any athlete will reassure you that sports is hugely creative and absolutely critical for brain health, and also is intrinsic in creating community, which of course is what creative arts is about. So I think we have a place at the table, and we are here to segue into tomorrow's theme, which of course is connection. So we're going to look at all these different connections. So with that, let me start. There we go. Okay. Is my slide building perfect? So you've heard that this is me here. My name is Iracema Leroi, and I'm with the Global Brain Health Institute, but I'm also a swimmer. And I came to Dublin in 2019, but it wasn't until 2022 that I had the opportunity to participate in the Liffey Swim. And yesterday, you would have all heard Brian Murray talk very nicely about his experience with the Liffey and the fears that his mother had of contracting diphtheria, typhoid, tuberculosis, and pneumonia. Now, I too, on diving in there, had those same fears. Now, I didn't contract any of those things, just a really bad case of diarrhea. Oh. And I can quite honestly say it wasn't a transformative, transcendent experience. The Liffey Swim was disgusting. So I think it's up there in the ranks of extreme swimming. But let's just chat a bit about extreme swimming. So extreme swimming essentially refers to swimming activities that take place in challenging and potentially hazardous conditions or environments. Now, I came across a very nice definition, which I'm going to share with you, but I've highlighted in bold green, and the lighting isn't very, very good, so I can barely read it. So I'm going to try my best here. But the definition is as such. Extreme swimming is a sport of extraordinary people with adventurous spirits who perhaps feel more at home in the embrace of nature's wild environments than in man-made communities. People who voluntarily depart from the comfort of their landlocked lives to submerge themselves into some of the world's harshest environments, to swim without sleeping for hours on end from one shore to another. Oh. So I think that epitomizes our swimmers, as you will be hearing over the next hour or so. So extreme swimming, as you can see, involves the cold, the ice, but also distance and also remote locations. So let me just touch on each of those before I introduce our swimmers. So first of all, the cold. So the history of ice swimming stems from Northern Europe and has been around as long as mankind, with the idea that populations, people have tried to invigorate their bodies in the ice and in the water throughout the cold winter months. And it's extremely popular in Northern Europe still. So I have a friend in Finland, her name is Hilla, and she regularly sends me WhatsApp pictures of herself swimming in her lake in Lapland, where she's cut a hole in the ice, and every morning in the dark goes and swims in the ice before getting into the sauna. And of course, in some countries like Russia and in Slavic nations, it's part of Orthodox religion. For example, Epiphany, that's an important ritual to submerge oneself in the water as a form of purification, sort of rejuvenation and transcendence. And I think we've all seen pictures of Vladimir Putin dipping himself into the ice water. But ice swimming really came to its own with the well-known American swimmer Lynn Cox, who at the height of the Cold War swam 3.5 kilometers in 4-degree water across the Bering Strait between Russia and the US. And then subsequently, many of you will be familiar with the name Lewis Pugh, who completed a 1-kilometer swim across the North Pole to highlight global warming in 2007. And he did that at minus 1.6 degrees Celsius. So this shows the limits of what's possible for human beings, and also the impetus behind some of these incredible feats. So moving out of the ice and into distance, also related to cold. So marathon swimming, of course, is now an important sport. It's an Olympic event, open water 10-kilometer swimming. But most long-distance swimmers are solo swimmers, and they go long distances far beyond 10 kilometers out in the open ocean, just themselves, the sea behind them, the sea in front of them, and a support boat, going from place to place, from shore to shore. And I think, the epitome really of long-distance swimming is the achievement of Diana Nyad, who swam from Cuba to Florida, more than 100 miles. And she swam without the aid of a shark cage, facing box jellies, cold, and exhaustion, and it took nearly 53 hours. So recently, as Ian was saying, I did a swim in the Western Sahara. That was a 30-kilometer swim over a couple of days. And at the end of it, my mouth was full of ulcers from the sea. So I can't imagine what 53 hours in the water would have been like. So a real feat of endurance. And then the last bit there is about remote locations. And I think the best description is what Nuala Moore has done. So this is a quotation I found about her. So swimming in the planet's deepest, darkest waters is where Nuala Moore feels most alive, like the Drake Passage, lying 55 degrees south. So if you rotate the world on its axis, there is no land east or west as the world turns. So water everywhere, and not a drop to drink. So this is where the confluence of the great oceans is, the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Antarctic. So really remote and amazing locations. So this is what extreme swimming is. So let me now introduce our swimmers. So the first is Ram Barkai, who's joining us from Cape Town online. And are we going to see Ram? Ah, magic. Welcome, Ram. Thank you so much for joining us. So let me just give an introduction to Ram, who is the founder of the International Ice Swimming Association. So Ram grew up on a kibbutz in Israel, near the Sea of Galilee. And I understand from your book, Ram, that at a very tender age, for the heck of it, you decided to swim across the Sea of Galilee, unaccompanied and without telling anybody. So that's Ram for you. So then you went on to become a desert soldier and a tank commander before you joined the world of finance, became a CEO of a finance company, and then you threw it all in the air at 2012 to follow your passion of Arctic swimming, of ice swimming, and understand that you're on track to get ice swimming as part of the Winter Olympics in the near future. So thank you very much for joining us, Ram, and of course also to say that you are the holder of 5 Guinness World Records, and you've completed swims in the Arctic, the Antarctic, the Dead Sea, the Cape Point, Cape Horn, Siberia, Alaska, Patagonia, and the list goes on. So Ram, you're very welcome. So next we have Barry Murphy from Dublin here. So Barry Murphy is Dublin's Old Man of the Sea. You'll never get rid of that title. No. So at the age of 60, Barry is the oldest man to have completed the original Triple Crown of open swimming. So this involves the English Channel between England and France, the North Channel between Ireland and Scotland, and the Bristol Channel between Wales and England, which I understand you actually did twice. Because the first time they didn't invigilate correctly.
Yes.
So you thought, off you'd go and just do it again, as you do. So you're very welcome, Barry.
Thank you.
And finally, Nuala Moore. Many of you may have seen her book, which has come out recently. And in 2006, Nuala was one of 6 swimmers to swim around the coast of Ireland in a relay for the first ever swim of over 1,300 kilometers, taking 56 days. So again, a very different kind of extreme swimming. So the ice swimming is quite short and cold and intense. Barry completes his generally within 24 hours, if he's having a good day, whereas Nuala is at sea for up to 56 days. So you can imagine being wet and cold and on a boat for 56 days. So a remarkable achievement. So welcome, Nuala. And then, of course, we have our last guest. Oops, sorry, there's Nuala. And we have Ian, who, of course, is very familiar to you all already. So Ian Robertson, of course, a neuroscientist, clinical psychologist, my friend and colleague from the Global Brain Health Institute. And I'm just going to read out a quotation from his profile, which I think is relevant here. And namely that Ian is a leading researcher on how an individual may harness the attention system of one's mind to enhance autonomy over emotions and cognitive function. So there isn't any extreme swimmer who isn't able to do that, exactly to harness the autonomy over your emotions and cognition to be able to achieve your feat. So Ian's role today is to dissect what we hear from our swimmers and help us understand the psychology and the neuroscience in the mind of an extreme swimmer. So welcome, Ian.
Okay.
So, moving on. Some of you may have wondered on the title of our panel today, which is Chop Wood, Move Water. Now, this comes from a Buddhist koan, which is actually chop wood, carry water. And for those of you who aren't familiar, a koan is a kind of a riddle or a puzzle that's used in Zen Buddhist meditation, which doesn't really have an answer, and it's something you think about and ponder on, and everybody comes up with a different interpretation. And this is one of them. And this came up because some of you may have seen this recent RTE documentary on Damien Brown and Fergus Farrell, who did a rowing voyage from the Atlantic, across the Atlantic Ocean from New York to Galway. And there's this one scene, which is a close-up of Damien Brown's face, presumably in response to the question of, how did you survive the loneliness, the isolation, the length? And he closes his eyes and he said, chop wood, carry water, chop wood, carry water. In other words, distilling it down to the basics. That's what the job is. Just keep moving, chop wood, carry water, and that's how we got through. And so I think that mantra is very appropriate for our swimmers today. But of course, as swimmers, we don't carry water, we move water. And so the first thing I'm going to do now is I've asked each of our swimmers to reflect on this idea of chop wood and move water, and to help us understand what is going on in their heads during their swims. So the first person I'm going to ask is Barry. Chop wood, move water. Tell us what goes through your head during your swims, particularly the North Channel.
Thanks, Iracema. I guess it's a bit like what you were saying there, breaking it down in terms of Damien Brown and how you actually face a swim that's, can be, over 40 kilometers in extreme conditions like water temperature of about 12 degrees. And you're dealing with tides and jellyfish and various wildlife as you're doing that. For me, I've found when you get to the start line of a swim like this, you have to clear your mind of everything else that might be going on in your life, and just face what's ahead of you in a way that you can distill into, I suppose, segments. I always find the first hour of any swim like this for me is the hardest swim. It seems like the longest period of time. I get in, I'm trying to get used to the conditions, the temperature, getting myself warmed up, if you like, in terms of my muscle stroke and my tempo and the cadence that goes with long distance swimming, in a way that, that hour for me is all about the diagnostic of me. But after that happens, then it's about breaking that down into, what is the next stage of this swim? And, having done all the training over the last 8 or 12 months, you're less worried about the physicality of it, although that's a big part of it. You need to be ready physically. It's more about the mental challenges that you do find when you're swimming for that length of time, because and I call it the demons. The demons arrive, and you know they're going to arrive because you're going to have doubts. There's going to be you're going to be uncomfortable for a long period of time in water temperature at that level. So I do a number of things. Some of it is, I do have a mantra. When things get really difficult, I just go into a place where I sort of just repeat a mantra that means something to me. And then I also tell myself that nothing lasts forever. So for me, in a swim like that, I say things like, it's only one day of my life, so, put up with whatever's been thrown at you, deal with it. And then there's the other aspects of it when, because I have a boat with me and I have a crew. So that's really important for me to be able to interact with them, at periods of time when I stop for feeds. So I stop for feed generally a half hour. Every 30 minutes I stop, I get a feed. They're either encouraging me or telling me to move faster or giving me feedback on how the swim is going. So all of those things I bring into my world. And some of the surprising things that happen to me when I swim in these things is an emotion of loneliness, actually, because you're swimming alongside a boat, but it's, your friends, your family are in the boat, but you're actually there dealing with, a tough environment. And that loneliness, it was the one emotion that really surprised me because I never factored it in. I always thought I was, I'm going to have my friends and family with me, and I'm going to be swimming, and that's going to be fine. But actually, when you're swimming in the middle of the night, in an environment where you're uncomfortable and tired and wondering, there's doubt there all the time in terms of the tides and how that's working, loneliness really comes into play there, and that's where your crew and the people around you sort of help you get through that. So it's about all those different emotions that come at various stages and just being ready for them, knowing that they're going to happen, and breaking that down into. So for me, I never think of it's a 12-hour swim. I think it's 24 half-hour segments, and I will experience all sorts of different things as I go through that and just deal with it until the next segment comes along. And eventually you get there, so.
Eventually you get there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, very
Cheers.
beautifully explained. Nuala, what goes through your mind?
It's interesting, obviously the rotation of the arms and preparing are one part of the event, but for me, I suppose the swimming was always a way of life for me. I grew up in and on the water, so I had a different relationship with being in the water for 4 and 5 hours. I would disappear and maybe swim home from places purely so I wouldn't get jobs to do. So like for me, being out there for hours on end was something I grew up with. In some of the swims, and I'll just touch on the Round Ireland, I think what I was exposed to fairly early on, and that was in 2006, so, and bearing in mind Twitter was only started in 2006, so it was quite a long time ago. We hadn't factored in what it was like to train for the challenge as opposed to the swim. And that was the first time I was exposed to something greater than what I had prepared for. And, Barry touched on it there about the loneliness and the darkness. And one of the things is when you're facing the water for such a long period of time, you can lose sight of the sky, you can lose sight of your surroundings. And the mantras are important for that reason, because you do want to hear what they're saying. You can't speak, you can't hear, you can't communicate in a normal way. So you are brought into this space. And I would have this, when the conditions were bad, I would have this mantra that if you can't breathe, you can't swim. So breathing was incredibly important to me. So if I would lose connection with my breathing, and if that rhythm went out, I would hear the exertion. So if I heard it meant that was more than the bubbles out. So I would go into all of those spaces when things got tough. When we were swimming around Ireland, we trained on average to swim between 4 and 6 hours every day, thinking that's it, we'll just swim for a 10K or a 14K. But then the miles got longer, not necessarily in distance, but our bodies got weaker. And say we started in Donegal, got as far as Carlingford Lough and got down the east coast very quickly because of the proximity of the island, or of the two islands, Ireland and England. And then when we turned Tusker Rock, suddenly, you know, the tides are running north-south in the world, and we're heading west. So what was 18, 20-minute miles for the boys, or 26-minute miles for us, suddenly became 50-minute miles. And then you have to balance the fact that you're getting weaker. You're 18 hours a day on these Zodiacs, you're frozen, and then everything now is becoming bigger. So yeah, you had that emotion, and then the fact that it was supposed to be 28 days, and now we've lost that deadline. So you're dealing with all the things of like, when is it going to be over, and can I afford to continue to give it all up? So the swim became secondary to the challenge, and the challenge became about the mind, because you have to decide if you're in the game or out of the game. And if you're in the game, then you just take whatever you get. So pain became part of the process. So for me at that point, you know, I remember thinking how privileged we were to have these experiences, and being able to have the strength that we had to be able to endure what we were enduring. So the swims were the easy part of rotating. But in the mantras like I had, it was like arm over arm, or if you can't breathe, you can't swim. So I'd have to bring it back to that moment. And as Barry said, you know, the 48 half hours or the 24 half hours, because for us it became about breaking it down to coast by coast, week by week. And then it suddenly became about swim by swim, because you couldn't look any bigger. Your brain would just bring it down to this moment, because if you looked any bigger, it became impossible. So what I loved about that, and that's why I loved the extremes, is because the humility is something that we rarely see. And the sea will always keep us honest, more so than the lakes and the rivers. But there's an honesty that we're required in the oceans and in the remote. So for me, that's what extreme and remote means to me. And it's not about the pain. And I think because we go through that every day, I was just coming in the dart. It was quite overwhelming. So yeah, it's the privilege, and it's the presence that you have, and the courage and the bravery to be present in those moments. Sorry,
Thank
now.
Beautifully said.
Okay.
So again, sort of courage, humility, loneliness, and both of you touching on this idea of mindfulness, breaking it down into chunks. Lots for Ian to pick up, but before I turn to you, I'm going to just see what Ram has to say. Ram, are you with us? Tell us what goes through your mind when you dive into those freezing oceans.
Hello, everyone from Cape Town. Thanks for asking me last. So I had about 20 minutes to recalibrate my ear to the Dublin accent. Always takes me a while to get used to the accent. Yeah, thanks a lot. I've done the long swims. I've done the different swims, but my focus is on ice swimming and on swimming in water temperature very close to zero. Just came back from Antarctica 2 days ago with a group of swimmers. Water obviously always around sub-zero there. I think the big difference between ice swimming to other swims, long swims, is that it's much shorter. You can't really spend hours in water temperature of close to zero. The ice always win, and you have to take it into consideration. So I always look at time in the water rather than distance. Swimming in such temperature is a very focusing experience. You go from environment and you dress up, so you're probably close to your core body temperature of about 36, 37 degrees. And you take off your clothes and you dive to an environment of -1 or 0 degrees. And basically energy moves mostly from -1 to your body, and you cool down very quickly. What goes in my mind start before the swim? For me, the swim starts, in ice swimming, starts about 10 minutes, roughly, before the swim. I kind of walk into some kind of, I call it my own capsule. I shut down the noise around me. Mentally, I even tell people around me, you can talk to me, please don't ask me questions, because that forces me to think and cut my line of focus. I'm starting to prepare myself to get into 0-degree water. I know that maybe unlike longer swims in warmer water, and I'm not saying that 12 degrees is warm, it's cold as well, the process is much slower. When you go into water close to 0 degree, the process hits you with the first second. You have to be prepared to that. If you're not prepared for that mentally, you will panic, and it happens to a lot of people. So I'm starting to visualize the swim. I'm starting to swim in my mind. Everything around me slows down. It's not something that only happens to me, it happens to a lot of swimmers. We discovered that our core body temperature rises a little bit. So there's a huge process of anticipation before you jump into the ice. There's another thing that I do before I go into the ice, and I think both speakers mentioned that. It's the commitment. I always say that I have a little switch here, mental switch, that I kind of switch off before I get into the water. I call it the switch of fear, because I know what I'm going to get into, and I know that if I'm going to hesitate or start asking myself questions like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing here? What I'm trying to prove? And all the questions that Brian probably asked himself hundreds of times, or Nuala, when you swim for hours, I will get out. I'll simply won't be able to swim. So I have a switch here. So when I get into the water, I kind of push away the fear, push away the questions. I'm here to swim and to finish the swim, and that's it. Once I get into the water, my focus is to get my breathing right. Rightfully so, Nuala said, if you can't breathe, you can't swim. I'm also asthmatic, so I have to get my breathing right. Once I get the breathing right, my stroke come right, and there's always a section in ice swimming when you suddenly feel all warm and fuzzy, and you actually say to yourself, I'm actually really enjoying this, and I can swim like this forever. Unfortunately, that section doesn't last for long. There's probably a minute or two that you're really in some kind of euphoric, fuzzy, warm feeling, and then the cold start to penetrate the core. There's a lot of physical things that are happening. You are very focused. I always say my mind is almost like a laser beam. I can't think of anything else. My mind is empty. My mind is focused on the fact that I'm swimming in close to 0 degree water, and the water is shutting my body down from my fingers and my toes to my core, and I have to manage it. I don't have a mantra, but I do have, and I'm also teaching it, I have a pilot checklist every now and then when I start to feel heavy. And remember again, things happen very fast in this temperature. It can start happening after 5 minutes. And at 20 minutes, you are very heavy and you doubt. Sometimes you don't even feel your arms, definitely not your hands or your legs. So you have to work with your mind. So I kind of have a checklist from my toe to my hands, and it ends up in my mind. And I kick with my toes to see if I can actually kick. If I can't kick, if any of these things fail, I've got a problem and I have to do something about this. But I kick, so oh, I can kick. I can splash some water. I move to my stroke, and I said, Ram, long stroke. Can you feel the water? I said, yeah, I think I can. I flex my fingers, because my fingers usually, they feel like big sausages and frozen sausages. So I go like this, and yeah, I can actually feel my fingers. So I said, okay, physically you're fine. And then I ask myself, Ram, are you okay? And if Ram answer back, I'm okay, then I tell Ram, so put your head down and carry on swimming. And then it's finished, most of the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. Beautifully explained. So, Ian, lots to unpick there.
Yes. So, carry wood, chop wood, carry water. I think there's several very interesting examples of it here. I was struck with you, Barry, just chopping it down into half-hour periods. It's 24 half hours. And what you're doing is you're controlling your attention so that you're setting a goal for yourself, that achieving that goal is what you're focused on. So it's like you're creating a tunnel of consciousness, and that you're not allowing yourself to think further than that. Isn't that right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, chopping wood and carrying water is about just focusing on what you're doing. If we were all, and incredible range, I think to be a cold water ice or ice swimmer, you have to become a master of your mind. And therein is a real link to creativity, because you're being creative in how to harness and control this most incredible machine in the universe, which is the human brain. And you're all three of you putting yourself in a situation where you're deliberately putting yourself into testing the limits of life, really, and of endurance. And all of us in life have to go through something like that with illness. We heard the previous panel, people going through terrible threats to their life through brain disease or injury. Yet, I would say many of us struggle to find the solutions to how to deal with this. But because you do it, it happens maybe to us only once or twice, or if we're unlucky, 3 times in the life, but you're doing it repeatedly. So you become kind of master mental practitioners in a way of how it's possible to control your contents of your mind and therefore your emotions by successfully chopping wood and carrying water. And I just thought this chunking and setting goals, and it's such a superficially simple thing to do, but it's absolutely critical for people engineering their own well-being, because what it does, it means that you don't just get a little burst of success, but you're possibly too exhausted to enjoy 12 hours later. You're getting that, I did it for that half hour. And your brain is generating mood-lifting, motivation-enhancing, anxiety-reducing chemicals as a result of achieving that small interim goal. And Nuala, I just thought that, the struggles you had in that round Ireland swim were really, I just recommend Nuala's book, Limitless. It's just absolutely fantastic, beautifully written and compelling. I mean, what a world adventure story, but just the round Ireland one, particularly, you've just struggled against, suddenly your speed has halved, and you're coming, and Dingle Bay is in there, and Dingle's in there. And rather than swimming into Dingle to meet your beloved fungi, dolphin, you're having to keep on going up this ghastly coast to Mayo and Donegal, and you went through all sorts of, because you were also worried about your business at home. You were worried about the cost of this, and so it was like you were compacting a whole series of kind of life stresses that people have to deal with. And creativity is at the absolute heart of dealing with life stresses and problems and illness, you know? Mm-hmm. And so you're a master practitioner of that. I mean, I do believe, and in many complex ways, and far from flawlessly at times. You know, and Ram, I just love this switch in your head, you know. The thing about when you're very, very cold, I mean, I dip into the water like a 5-year-old trembling, you know, in winter. I was in on Saturday, you know, and I squealed for about 30 seconds or a minute or something. But the thing is, you can think of nothing else. When you're in there in the sea, I mean, it's the most remarkable thing. But if you had to stay in there for longer, you would have to, by God, we would all need that kind of switch. And also, you know, it's all three of you, it's not about the body, really. It's 90% about the mind. And if you go into that water, Ram, without having controlled the physiology of your body to be in the state that it's ready to embrace this extreme shock to itself, it could kill you without that mental preparation, I'm guessing. You know, I don't know. Don't try it. So anyway, I find this a fascinating set of real life examples, and the more I hear the three of you talk, the more I'm convinced of the link between the cold, these challenges, and creativity, and indeed everyday life. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. And I think the other thing that really came out, particularly with what you said, Ram, and Nuala as well, and Barry as well, is this transcendence. You know, at some point, there's something that happens. I don't know if the word is joy or something or happiness, but there's a transcendence of going beyond, going outside of yourself, even though it doesn't last very long till the misery hits again. But I think that's pretty common to all extreme sports, is that kind of going beyond. So let me move now to our next question, which is the question you would have all had many times, and that's about motivation. Why? Barry.
I ask myself that every time I stand on the shore thinking I have another 12 or 14-hour swim to do. I guess the why for me started off very different to why I think I do it now. The why for me at the time, I've been a swimmer all my life, mainly pool swimming, but I did a lot as a young kid. I did many open water swims, you know, a much lesser distance, and you know, to be honest, never really enjoyed them. And I guess about 15 years ago, I started getting back into open water swimming. And for me, I really enjoyed the physicality of it, because it isn't, you know, a pool is nice and flat. It's at a particular temperature and you're going up and down, and that's great. And I found I had a bit more time on my hands to be able to swim open water. Found I enjoyed it. Found I was quite good at it in terms of, you know, how I dealt with the cold. And I guess the physicality of me, one day I sort of said, I wonder the English Channel, that would be a sort of a great goal to set for myself. And, you know, I trained hard, and I got myself ready for that. And again, took advice from a lot of the community, and there's a huge community in open water swimming, I'm sure you're all aware, and people who've done this before, and people who are willing to share their experiences. And I really like that connection with other people, like-minded people who wanted to help, but also who've done it before, and who were sort of icons for me in many ways. But the interesting thing about it was that actually, and it's back to Ian's point, it's the mental challenge that comes with this rather than the physical challenge that I really enjoy. It's the preparation, getting your mind right, you know, leaving all your worries on the beach before you get into the water, and then when you're in the water, the things you have to do to get there. Because, you know, to be honest, the swimming part of it is something that, you know, again, just because I've swam for so many years, isn't the biggest challenge for me. The biggest challenge is actually staying in there and finding a way through the problems that you're going to encounter, whether that's, you know, jellyfish stings or the cold, or you're feeling really cold. How do you get yourself warm again? You know, how do you bring yourself back into that sort of feeling of, actually, I can do this? Because once you start feeling cold, once you start feeling tired, you know, you start doubting yourself. And it's about being able to, and have that sort of mental fortitude to be able to say, or that mental training really, which you've done in your training, you know, I need to get myself back into the game here. I need to be able to continue on, because, you know, and they say you should never ask your boat, you know, how long have I been swimming? But, you know, I know, just because my feeds are so regular, I know how long I've been in and how long I'm generally going to be, you know, that I've left to do. So it's all of that I love, is the fact that when you get there and when you walk out on the other side, you sort of say, you know, I actually learned an awful lot from that about myself, you know, in terms of things I had to deal with. And every swim is different, you know. And every single swim, I can tell you where that I've done, I can tell you the real challenge was in that swim was, you know, in the North Channel, it was the cold. In the Bristol Channel, it was the force 5 conditions that developed, which weren't meant to happen. In the English Channel, it was actually swimming at night for a prolonged period of time, you know, and the tides that came with that. So all of that you have to deal with. And so the why is really the mental challenge, I think, for me anyway. The physical challenge is obviously there. You have to train and be ready for it in that respect. But you never know what's ahead of you when you get in the water, and that's why I do it.
Thank you, Barry. I'm now going to jump up to Ram. Now, this is meant to be Ram. It's actually a woman. Sorry about that, Ram. But look, it's the Arctic anyway. So
Jamie.
Tell us your why.
Oh, it's the billion-dollar question. I echo a lot of what Brian said. I think for me, the why question is almost similar to, you know, how do you define happiness in your life or satisfaction in your life? And if you ask me every 5 years or 10 years, I'd probably give you a very different question. I think initially the why, probably driven by challenge and attraction to extreme, unknown, impossible, and can we do it? Some kind of a morbid curiosity, I'd say, for someone who wants to swim in 0-degree water and find out whether it can be done or not, because the other answer is obviously if you can't be done, the answer can be quite unpleasant. But I thought about that because I go around and do a lot of things, and people always ask me two questions: what's next and why? What's next I usually ignore, and why makes me think a lot. And it's something that I do ask myself on a regular basis. I probably, every long distance swim that I've done in the last 10 years in cold water, we swim here in 12 degrees, sometimes 10 degrees. I kind of prepare my retirement speech to explain to everyone why I can't do this anymore, because it's just too taxing. And then I forget after 10 minutes after the swim, I forget this and I start to think about the other swim. But I think if you ask me now in my life, why do I still do it? For me, it's some kind of a calling. I can't really explain it. When I see icy water, beautiful location, distant, extreme location with icy water, I feel drawn to this, and I feel like I'm sure the psychiatrists here have a lot to say about this, that I've got to take my clothes off and I've got to go for a swim. And I like to swim, not a deep. I like to swim a distance, and I like to really get into this. So it's some kind of a calling now. It changes me. I'm a different person when I suddenly in that environment and I swim. It brings something in me that, almost some kind of a fountain of youth type of experience. When I come out of these swims, I do feel like cleaner, healthier, happier, ready to face any challenge in life, much more equipped to do that. So I have to do it again and again.
Thank you, Ram. So that element of the transformation, purification, and even addiction comes into there, doesn't it? So thank you very
Probably,
much. Now, let's go over to Nuala. What's your why?
My why. You know what? I was very privileged in writing the book that I really needed to unpeel the why. So I think for me, it's been a very different journey in the last few years in particular, because I always, as Ram mentioned, the why changes. I always believed this is why I was doing it, and then suddenly you peel it back and you say, well, that was never the reason. So I think we do have to kind of sit ourselves back a little bit further and not look at what we've achieved or what we're doing, but the reason we defended it in the first place. I spent a long time doing marathon swims and, organising swims and stuff, but I hit a period after the Round Ireland. 2011 was my longest, or my last. I swam across Lake Zurich, 26 kilometres. And I remember I think I was kind of broken at the time. I would get into the water and train for 6 hours or 7 hours, and people would say it was very difficult, and I couldn't understand that point. It's like, if you have to do it, then you do it. And I really couldn't view anything as being difficult, because then it would be something that I would have to build on. So I kind of decided that I hit a period that after all these huge events, I couldn't find the value. Like I was walking up the street and turning the key in the door and going back to work thinking, God, I'd just given all of that up, but I couldn't find the value. So at the time, I remember thinking that I really needed to look at the sky. And for me, the darkness, the loneliness, the training, being on my own, having to do things. And I don't have a pool where I live, so I would have to train by going to Tralee. So that was adding another 3 hours on top of the training program. And I remember sitting back and thinking it wasn't for me anymore. So in 2011, I met Ram in New York, and I listened to him talking about ice swimming at the time, and I thought, as he said, it's a short period. People stay alive for 25, 30 minutes. I said, I can hack it. And we never once thought of the pain. Like nobody ever thought about how difficult it would be. It was exciting. It was adrenaline filled. It was going to be a pushback. And if somebody is going to be on those limits, that's exciting. So, in December 2011, we invited Ram to Ireland, actually, to Donegal. And that was my introduction to ice swimming. So over the period of the next few years, what I loved most about the ice was the fact that it took my breath away. When I went in there, it was like this sense of, the cold shock. But in that cold shock was like, it brings it back to this, this is why I'm here. And there was something beautiful in that. And it makes you focus on everything that drew me to water in the first place. That, when you go in, you have all these other things going on. And when you come out, you're just focused on freezing. And that's your reason. You just clear everything down. It clears your clutter, blows out the cobwebs. When I was trying to push into the 1,000 meters at zero, I was shocked at how hard it was. And I remember trying to figure out a way to swim 1,000 meters at zero, and that was in 2012-13. And I remember it was about letting go of control, because I would be controlling, trying to swim for 5 hours or 4 hours or whatever. But in ice, you have to let go of the control, and you have to trust yourself so that you can breathe. And sometimes it's when you let go of control that you have to find control in the next step. So it's kind of like relinquishing control every challenge and then finding it again. And there's something magical in rebuilding yourself. And for me, in March 2013, I went to Murmansk and I did the 1,000 at zero. And it was 23 minutes for me. I'm slower. And I remember that focus of one arm after the other up and down the pool. And I just was so excited by what I'd achieved. And then for the years after, I did a lot of kind of ice swims around the world. But I craved the ocean. I felt very contained in the pool. Bouncing off walls was not something for me. So then I had the opportunity of the Bering Strait, and then I had the opportunity of other big swims. But for me, it brought me back to the Round Ireland. I had to heal from there. But what I loved about the Round Ireland and what I loved about the Bering Strait and what I loved about The other challenge is that in that storm, in that chaos, I loved who I was. I loved the battle. I loved the fact that I couldn't understand it and I worked it down. Like, I loved how powerful I felt when I let go of control and still could be in control. Like, I'd be somebody who'd go out at night looking for a fight. Not really. But, but it was, that sense of power in the chaos. So, yeah, I think for me, when I talk about my why, it's the person that I am when things go crazy. I love that person. And you can only get them by going into those moments. But then you go home and turn the key in the door, put the kettle on. So, yeah, that's
Amazing.
why.
So Ian, lots to unpick there.
Well, I have to say, Nuala, that you've stretched my mind quite a lot. No, but I think in a very good way. I don't quite understand it. But that's not because what you've said is not correct. It's just that I believe you've said something quite profound about this cycle of giving up control at one level, but then re-implementing it. And maybe in the brain it's even two levels of control. You see, we know, just for example, there's the supervisory attentional system, which is in the prefrontal cortex, which is what deals with all these novel situations, difficult situations, problems in life or problems in keeping warm and problems in keeping going. But then there's the anterior cingulate, which is further down, which is more a kind of, if the supervisory attentional system is the CEO of the company, the anterior cingulate is either the operations manager or the foreman. It makes decisions, but they're more semi-automatic decisions. And it sounds to me, just in neurological terms, as if you might have been cycling between, you give up this frontal lobes, look, I can't comprehend, I don't have a plan for this. But that, in a way, allowed the lower level, middle management, to make some decisions to keep you going, and then that allowed you then to bring it. But that's a fairy story, really, a neurological fairy story, but neuropsychological fairy story. But what you described there, I think, is a profoundly interesting observation about the mind.
Yeah.
And what struck me about your book in particular was, this how your motivation wasn't something you took for granted.
No.
You had struggles with why I'm doing this. Why am I doing this? And particularly after the All-Ireland swim. And it was all tied in with all other things going on in your life. And then I think it was, Ram really got you out of that, didn't he? Really.
Well, it was just the ice. Yeah.
And then, I'm going to come to Brian and Ram in a moment, but just your description of you having to step when you down in the South Atlantic, and the seas were really too big for you to swim, but you were going to swim, and they couldn't. The seas were too big for the mothership to stay, for the Zodiac to stay close to you. So you had to go in these mountainous waves on your own. In the middle of the night, did you start, or very early? No. But it seemed like it was so dark.
Yeah.
And you had the loneliness, the fear, the awful existential void that you stepped into there. I mean, it was just one of the most amazing tales I've read. I think that if you need to link this to creativity, my God, you're the creative acts you've had to undergo to deal with this. And Brian, and also Ram, what we haven't mentioned is just the sheer physiological effect of cold water immersion on the brain, and the tenfold increase in noradrenaline in the brain, and in other neurochemicals. Not dopamine comes later, but it is potentially addictive. And I think actually you described some quasi-addictive qualities to it. The motivation for a while was kind of addictive, and that eventually can run into the sand if you're motivated in that way. But you kept, Nuala, I think, finding fresh ways of doing it. But Brian, you were for you it was the challenge. Can I do this? And the challenge was different each time. So you need to be creative. You didn't have a routine. A mental routine you could run off. There was different things you had to deal with. How do I deal with feeling cold? How do I deal with jellyfish? How do I deal with the dark? How do I deal with loneliness? And similarly, Ram, you've had to develop all the creativity and having to develop all these mental routines, and just also the creativity in developing a changing narrative around explaining why you're doing this ridiculous thing. But it's not ridiculous, it's wonderful, because afterwards you come out, and it's not surprising, the most significant medical effects or physiological effects of cold water immersion are on mood, and it's an antidepressant. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. So we were going to touch on consequences, but I'm just conscious of time because I really wanted the audience to have a chance to answer some questions. So I'm just going to flip through my slides here. This was meant to be for you, Barry. It's actually not you, that's my friend Owen, but you were there that day. Barry was up in the front chasing not the dolphins, the seals, so he was there that day. And this, of course, is a picture of Nuala's remarkable swim around Ireland. But let's just jump to the very last point here, which is about creativity. Now, we've already touched on it. It was meant to be sort of the final point. I'm going to go around and ask each of you where you found your creativity in this madness. And of course, Nuala, starting with you, I mean, it's fairly obvious, and we've already touched on it. Here's the book, in case you want to see it. So tell me about your creativity that's come out of this.
It was very interesting. In 2016, 17, I really felt that, I suppose, where was my history? Like, how would I be remembered? And it wasn't in anything like, how will I be remembered? A few things happened in my life, and you suddenly look back and you think, my God, I've been on a roller coaster for nearly 20 years. And suddenly you realize that a huge amount of my stuff hasn't been recorded. And it wasn't for, I suppose, me, because I know I've done everything. And I suppose, in a way, an awful lot of my events, I just came home and went back to work, because I was never the person who could stay for a period of time. I always had to be home for work on Monday, that kind of stuff. So I think when I was given the opportunity to write the book, I was very lucky that right through all of my events, I used to write for myself. I had to kind of exercise the demons in my brain, because I would have a lot of questions afterwards, and I used to kind of write down when I got home how I felt, or things that went on, or things, because I just have this kind of way of needing to understand, like, what the hell happened there. So I was given the opportunity to write my book, and initially they suggested, it was Guild Publishing, if I wanted to write like What the Water Gave Me, and I said, no, thank you. Thank you very much, but no, that wasn't my story. And then it was an option of like A Love Letter to the Sea, and I thought, well, they haven't been the most successful, so we let that go. And I just kind of said, if you can just give me time. So my primary goal in writing my book was to leave a story that my nieces and nephews and the families after us, will understand what strong looks like. Because I don't know if the next generation down have the ability to close their eyes and identify images. The storytelling isn't as present as it used to be. And I don't think we embark in a manner of communicating like we have today, like our journeys. We come home, everyone goes back to work, and it's compartmentalized. And, would you know what Barry thought about, or the insanity of the people in Nuala's head, or Ram's story? And I think having the ability to put on paper your own thoughts, it keeps me calm. And it's for me. And, sometimes I forget I have to market it, and I have to do these gigs to sell it, because I'm just so happy with it. And they asked me for, say, 66,000 words, and I submitted 170,000. But I just had so much to say. So for me, like, writing the book was about me, was for me, and it was for my future. And not in any way except that, I would hope that at some point people would look back on my life and think, gosh, that was strong, that was power. I was on the cusp of my own greatness, because I think that's what we all seek, isn't it? To be the best version of what it is we're looking for. So, yeah.
on the cusp of your own greatness. That's amazing, Noah.
Yeah.
And what strong looks like. And it absolutely comes through the book. And this is not part of your marketing gig, by the way.
Oh,
This
no,
is,
no.
But it's definitely a very
Disaster, yeah.
good read. Thank you. Ram, your book here I've got as well, From Fire to Ice, From the Desert to the Ice. Now, one thing I didn't understand from the book was actually how that transition was made, but where's your creativity come from in all of this?
I think I lived many lifetimes in some way in one lifetime. And I think I try to tell that story in the book in a sense that I grew up in one place. My parents were from a completely different, probably dimension in the world, Holocaust survivors. I grew up in a farm and I ended up in the army in Tokyo. So kind of adapting and reinventing myself became part of who I am. And when I came to Cape Town, settled down in Cape Town finally, because I came here first time 1981. When I came down to settle down was 1996. There was only one place to swim. I don't like indoor pools. I try to avoid them as much as possible. So the option is to swim in the ocean, and the ocean is cold. And I had to adapt. And I remember when I started swimming in cold water, which was a completely new experience for me. It was very difficult, and I was completely surprised that I can do it. I can actually do it quite well, and I actually enjoy it. So that the calling started a long time ago when I first met the cold water, and being who I am, I like to spend my life outside of the gray. So I'm usually on the extreme side of everything in life. And the minute I start liking the cold, I wanted colder and colder and colder, and ended up in Antarctica. And I said, well, I can swim in zero. Let's see how far I can swim. And after that, I founded the International Ice Swimming Association, which we have members. It's my full-time job now, basically. So I'm also have a full-time unpaid job in my passion. I got the ice kind of became my life. My personal kind of side to it, creativity to that, is probably my recent trip to Antarctica. I've been to Antarctica 4 times already, swam there, and I'm going again in November. Going to the North Pole in August, been there twice, swimming. So I became a little bit of an explorer, and swimming in remote, very remote, cold, extreme places is kind of my escape from the overstimulating life that we have now with everything coming towards you at the speed of light, whether it's true or not, from all direction. And then TikTok came along, and I'm too old for TikTok, so I thought I should go to Antarctica. I'd rather be creative in Antarctica than get membership on TikTok.
Thank you very much, Ram. So moving beyond the everyday, isn't it?
Yes.
And Barry, there you are with Dave Barry, another one of Dublin's great open water swimmers.
Yeah.
And what's going to emerge?
The first thing that's come out of all of this for me is I need to write a book. So I'm going to have to get going on that. But for me, I've been thinking about this, the creativity, because I wouldn't view myself as being a very creative person, but actually swimming has been part of my life, over the years. But it's very much been my thing. It's been very much, 2 kids who are not swimmers. My wife doesn't swim. I have a brother who swims, but he lives in Cork. So, it was always I was heading off swimming. Where's Dad? Or where's Barry gone? He's gone off swimming again. And the actual swimming, particularly the channel swimming and that, I got quite creative in how I broke all the rules, first of all. If you're ever attempting to do a channel swim, one of the things, the advice you'll get is, have a good crew, but make sure it's not your wife, your son, anyone that you know really well. Have someone who understands channel swimming. And have two. I had 5 on my crew. It was my wife who knew nothing about swimming. It was my son who knew nothing about swimming. It was my friend who knew nothing about swimming. My brother did come along who knew a bit about swimming, nothing about channel swimming, and another support swimmer who was a pool swimmer. And, it worked brilliantly. And I found a way to interweave people who were really important to me in my life into my swimming world. And, my wife, who would have been, I suppose, the biggest sort of, I know nothing about swimming, that's your thing, now has been on all of my channel swims, enjoys them, although she says she doesn't, is like the logistics expert on how we pack all our food, how we get to it, and we got really creative around sort of feeding poles and all the equipment that goes with that. And there's a huge amount of equipment that goes when you're doing this, and Nuala and Ram will I'm sure agree on that. And for me, that's when I look back, that gives me such a sense of fulfillment, really, And for me to be able to bring swimming into their lives was something which was unintended, actually. But now it's sort of, when we go out for family dinners, we talk about, what's next coming up and how are we going to do it and who's going to get involved. So for me, that's a success. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Ian, you get the last word on creativity, and then we'll hand it over to the audience for questions.
Well, I've been spending the whole last hour trying to catch your eye to say you've been calling this guy the wrong name.
Go on then, Brian Barry.
I heard Ram. I thought, oh, Jesus, it's Brian, not Barry.
It's because of Brian and his liffey swim yesterday.
Yeah. So, Barry, I apologise for that. No, I've talked enough. I think the case is made. To do this stuff, you have to be creative, and there's lessons in it for all of us in living our lives, I think.
Thank you very much. Good. Now, 5 minutes of questions. Anybody want to ask anything of our wonderful speakers? This is your opportunity. I can't quite see out there. Yes, there's a question here. Please go ahead.
If I could do 2 questions in one, both short. First part would be, is there a sense of awe doing this, maybe an awe at self? And the second one is this extreme focus, extreme attentional control, does it transfer to other aspects of life? Thank you.
Amazing question. Sense of awe and attentional control, does it change your life in other ways? Does it transfer? Who wants to answer that? Sense of awe.
Pick one.
There was no one more surprised than me, I guess, after I completed my first swim, which was the English Channel, because, again, the most I'd done up to then was a 10K, a couple of 10K swims. So, and in an 8-month period, I trained then to do the English Channel. So I was never certain, and no one can be, that I was going to get there. So when I climbed up on the French shore, there was that sense of, wow, I've actually done this, what I set out to do, which was an amazing feeling. And, there's videos after it of me just sitting there on the boat, on the way back to Dover, nearly sort of in shock that I got there. So, yeah, there's a huge sense of awe. I think that becomes not less, but it's like, if anyone's gone skiing, the first time you ski is always the best time you've done it because of the fun you have and all the new experiences you have. I think subsequent swims were very different and probably less of awe, but more, you're driven to achieve that goal of the next swim and know you can do it, but it's how you do it is really where I was coming from in the subsequent ones. But yeah, that awe is about yourself and, wow, I set out to do something and now I've done it, which is always a great achievement. And just the second part of that, I'm not sure it translates exactly into it, but a lot of the things you bring into that sort of environment in terms of setting goals for yourself, I have set myself in my own personal life all through the years. I've a software company, and I I run it myself, and I've got guys working for me. And you know, you're running a business in the same way, in many ways. You set goals, you set objectives, you break it down, you deal with the problems. You know, all of those transform, you know, directly into the swimming world, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Nuala.
Yeah, for me, I suppose, like, one of my things, and I know we've spoken about this before, is owning your swagger. I know it is, like, for me, I would look in the mirror and sometimes I'd be disappointed with what is looking back. And not always in a physical way, even though sometimes it would disappoint. But sometimes I would lose it in my eyes. So I became my biggest fan, you know, and I had to be. But I think what excited me the most was what I was able to achieve with what I was balancing. Because I would have a statement that the cost of any event is the amount of your life you exchange for it. And we forget about what it takes to just get to the start line, and then what it takes to get to the finish line, because there's an awful lot of moving tectonic plates in everything that we do. So I became a huge fan of myself, purely because of what I was willing to give up for the outcome. And it wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always pretty. So when I achieved some of the stuff, and then I became more excited then, you know, with some of the sacrifices I was willing to do, like letting go of control. Like when, you know, say with the swims out the Cape Horn, like, you know, I was terrified to let go of the boat. But then I had to trust myself. So it's the excitement of trusting your team, trusting yourself, trusting your preparation, and taking the risk anyway. So yeah, I always did what I did to be proud of what was looking back at me. When I looked in the mirror, and you know, you have to be free to succeed. You have to be able to look in the mirror and be happy with what's looking back at you. And that is a constant battle in my world. Love Island hasn't called, but I'm hopeful. we have to forever keep these things going. So yeah, how it translates in life, I agree, it translates all the way through. What I would use is, like, you know, micromanaging anything. I would be a very sniper-focused. If this has to be done, then it has to be done. Pain, nothing matters. You know, nothing matters. Because if this is the outcome, then we're in it until we're out of it. So I would have a very super ability to pull things apart down to tiny minutiae, and everything else becomes removed, except arm over arm. If you can't breathe, you can't swim. And just focus on this moment. So yeah, I would consider it necessary to live my life for all of the girls that live in my head. It's a big gang in there.
Thank you, Nuala. And just in the interest of time, we're going to stop it there. And I just want to thank all of you for your fantastic attention on behalf of our swimmers. Maybe just speak to the next slide, if you don't mind. Yep, perfect. So this is the swimming crowd at Killiney. This is the Dorky Island Hiking Club. And now you'll notice none of them have any hiking boots, but you'll find them at the beach at any morning. So maybe they're the Dorky Island Addictions Club. I'm not entirely sure. But as you can see, thinking about connections, community, creativity, it's all there. So thank you very much. And I'd like to thank our swimmers. Ram on the screen. You just pop up Ram for a second, please. Thank you very much. Barry and Nuala and Ian. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. So enjoy the rest of your evening. And if anybody wants to get in touch, the next slide has my thanks, Ram, so much. I'll see you in Cape Town in a few weeks from now. Bye.
Yes, sure.
Just to remember, the evening is not finished.
Oh.
5 o'clock. 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock back here for an amazing reflections. And it will be amazing. So please come back. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.